You're listening to Cinebinge.
Welcome to Cinebinge. This show was born from my friend's persistence in me watching certain shows.
I've been asking Simon to watch Dark, a German TV show on Netflix, which I guarantee he will like. But for some reason, he's always been a little apprehensive about watching it.
So I said, I'll watch it if we can put a podcast around it. And this is that podcast. Welcome to Cinebinge. My name's Simon.
And my name's Andrew.
And today we are talking about, or we continue talking about, the series Dark. And we're on episode 6. And I realised something. There's only 10 episodes per season.
Only for the first season. The last two are shorter.
So I'm over halfway.
You are.
That's a really good feeling. Not that I'm not enjoying it, because I am starting to really enjoy it. I'm thinking now it must start to really build momentum, and it must start to reveal plot points and move the story along like at a pace, because you can feel the whole thing is starting to build up and build up. It was slow to begin with, but now I feel like it's about to accelerate. Would that be a fair presumption?
Yeah, I would say so. I know certainly when I was watching this for the first time, I think by obviously the end of the last episode, with the revelations that we heard in that episode, followed by the way this episode is panning out, we then start to, for me at least, I was itching to get straight onto the next episode by now. I was like, I need answers. I need to know what's going to happen. I need to know what's going on and why.
This episode was called, well, there's something in Greek. I can't remember what. Can you remember what it was called in Greek? The Greek wording of it?
It was Latin, Sic Mundus Creatus Est.
You know, it's so funny that this is actually the third time we've recorded this, and every time I've said it's Greek and Andrew said, no, it's Latin. So he's like, yeah, shows how much you listen, which is true. I do listen, but only when it's important, and that was important. So moving on.
And what did it mean in English?
It means the world's not enough. No, that's unfair. It means no time. No, it means the world is created.
Yes, it's actually a quote from a real-world artifact called the Emerald Tablet.
What was your take on it when you first saw it?
Well, there's certainly more questions in this episode. I mean, let's talk about what this episode is about as a whole, really. You've got Ulrich really digging in now, trying to find out what happened in the past with his brother, to the point where he is even challenging his own family members on what actually happened back in 1986. By the end of the episode, you get the feeling that it's dawned on him who the child is that appeared in the beginning of the first episode. So that's certainly an interesting development there. Meanwhile, you also have some developments around some of the families. The Tiedemans seem to be going through some major troubles in their life at the moment. And the Nielsen's are clearly going through, I think reality is catching up with them in terms of what they're going through, in terms of Mikkel disappearing. It's finally catching up with Marta and Katerina as well. So there's a lot going on there. And obviously, while all this is going on, we also have Jonas visiting the caves and trying to find out what mysteries the cave has. So lots to unpack, I guess, in this episode.
He has decided to follow the signal, which was written on the map that he had. This is Jonas. And that was the part of the episode that I enjoyed the most. I found that the most interesting, and it was, you know, he goes into the cave, and again, we're hit with more imagery of loops and threads, which I found really interesting. He goes into this cave and he comes across a door, and the door has this symbol that is on a certain book that we've seen, I think, a few times now, but I'm not too sure how that all ties in at this moment. But Jonas is clearly onto something. He's on a mission. Does he know what he's even looking for, or is he just intrigued by what's on this map?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say he doesn't actually know what's there, does he? He's just following what's being written on a map, and he wants to see if it reveals anything interesting. Obviously, with the news that he had for himself last episode, he obviously knows that the cave has some sort of bearing on Mikkel and his father. So he wants to find out more about that. I think he's inquisitive to find out the exactly what happened around his father's disappearance and death and so on. So I think that's probably driving him to investigate the caves, with the writing on the map telling him to like follow the signal, plus the thread in the cave somebody is obviously trying to guide him towards this. So there's clearly a reason they need him to do whatever it is that he's doing here, because they're giving him a lot of tips to find whatever it is that they want him to find.
I might sort of step ahead here. Simon's theory. I think the person who is trying to help him, I think it is him who is trying to help him.
Okay.
I watched Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure today, and that's a really good film because I think it helps me understand time travel more than Dark. And I don't know if you've seen that. Have you seen Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure? Of course you have.
I have, but not for a very long time.
Okay,
it's one
so
that I have to dig out.
They go back in time and like they see themselves, and there's part where they go, "Oh, I need to get the keys to my dad's car or something," and he's like, "Okay, well, we tell our future selves when they go back to leave the keys under this brick." Excellent, and I'm like, "That's like Dark. That's like Dark." So I thought, yeah, that's so I thought, well, maybe bringing it back to Dark, maybe Jonas has set this out for himself.
That would suggest then that the writing on that map is his own handwriting in the future.
Yes.
Does he recognise his own handwriting? I suppose is a good question.
Unless he got someone to write it for him. Yeah.
Now we're stretching it a little bit, aren't we? I guess if he doesn't recognise his own handwriting, then perhaps it's not him.
Well, would you recognise your handwriting?
I probably would.
If I saw a letter I wrote in the future, but I hadn't wrote now, I don't think I'd recognise it, because the only reason you'd recognise something that you've wrote is because you've wrote it and you would recognise it because you'd remember holding the pen and writing it. But if it was in the future and it came back to you, you'd be like, well, it's similar, but I didn't write that, because you wouldn't know it's from the future.
Wouldn't you just make sure by writing, "Hi Simon, here's a message from your future self. Please do this. It's really important."
I mean, did you see that letter that I got from me in the future?
Yes.
It said, "Hi Simon, start a podcast, otherwise the world will end." So I started 3.
Just to make sure.
Just to make sure. Yeah.
Unless making more than one actually causes the end of the world.
Yeah, like a paradox. Shout out to Back to the Future again. I think Jonas has potentially left those clues for his, or maybe not Jonas in the future, but maybe Jonas in the past left that for him to find.
So Jonas, in a version of him in the past,
yes,
doesn't remember him writing the same notes.
No. He didn't write the map, but it was Jonas in the past who set that thread, that trail.
Okay, right. So are you saying that there was a Jonas who, at some point in the future,
forget Jonas? Jonas was never in the future. I've changed my mind about that. Jonas in the past, we're talking 1980. Jonas who goes back in time, because that's what happens in this episode. He goes back to 1986.
Oh, I see. Yes. Right. Okay.
So that's where my thinking is with that one.
That's what I meant by a Jonas in the future. I mean, at some point beyond the episode that we've just watched.
Oh, okay.
A version of his young self will set up the clues so that his current present day self will find those clues. I get what you're saying now. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a possibility. Yeah, I like that. That's certainly a staple of some various science fiction time travel type stories.
Yeah,
that could be possible.
I think, to be perfectly safe with what we're doing with this, and for you, I used to listen to, funnily enough, a podcast about Lost when that was on, and it was hosted by Damon Lindelof and the writer. And whenever they did like a live thing and someone asked a question or they had a theory that was sort of close to what it was potentially was, Damon would just say, I can see, I appreciate the question, but I am not going to answer that, or I'm not going to confirm that, because I'm starting to think I'm getting well close here and I can feel like you're getting proper twitchy and nervous.
Or...
You just shot me right down. No, you don't need to say anything else. Just by just saying, or, I'm like, all right, I'm fucking wrong, aren't I?
Yeah. I think I did mention in the past that I would be attempting to divert the some of your theories and questions in the wrong direction to keep you guessing. A few red herrings here and there. The odd question that I know I will be asking has no real relevance to the show at all, but is there to keep your mind racing. So yeah, no, it's yeah, I'd rather say that than just shutting it down by going, I don't want to answer that, because I think that really does prove once and for all that it is getting too close to the truth.
Yeah.
So no, I'm going to continue to deflect.
So the other thing we find out is Tanner is proper crazy, and Ulrich. You'd have thought he'd have done this already, though. If someone accused you of rape, you'd have thought maybe when you get into his power, like you get into his sort of vocation, his job, you'd be like, who actually did accuse me of that? And you know what I mean? Like, I thought that was a bit strange that he hadn't already investigated that.
I do wonder. I mean, obviously the ramifications of that, being able to look at a case that involves you, whether that's actually something that he's even legally allowed to do, despite his position. That's something that did cross my mind. Yeah, but I did wonder, why hadn't he sneaked a look previously to see what the deal was with that? I guess he was so confident that it was Regina Tiedemann that had done it that I guess he never really thought twice to look at it.
But he absolutely is being caught now, because she sees the itemized phone bill, she phones it, and then Hannah answers it and is like, mate, that's it, you're done. I mean, she was suspicious already, like you said last week.
Yeah.
She could smell that like she could tell the smell, but now she's like, it's confirmed to her. But then the fact that Ulrich confronts Hannah, and you're like, oh, you feel really kind of awkward, because she is guilty as, and then she just basically says she did it because she didn't say she loved him, did she? But did she say, like, I have to have you, or something like that?
It was not necessarily love, I guess, at that point. It was more just that she had to have him and no one else could have him.
Going back to Jonas, when he's in the cave, I like Jonas. He seems the most sort of relatable and normal character at the moment. But when he goes into the cave, I thought, what's he looking for? What is this? And obviously comes across this door. Well, then we cut to Doppler, and is it Ulrich's dad?
Yes.
All right, so we cut to them in this hut, and they're waiting for something. Like, they know something is about to happen.
Yeah, I mean, even earlier in the episode, when Ulrich was outright accusing his dad of knowing stuff around his brother's disappearance back in 1986, questioning his mum and saying, why are you defending dad? Because he wasn't there. I remember that he wasn't there that night. His mum starts to admit the truth, that he was basically having an affair with Claudia Tiedemann at the time. Ulrich's clearly really sort of worried now. He's trying to find out what's going on, and we know that his dad must be involved in something, because with the redness on his sleeve in, I think, episode 2, his dad clearly knows something is up. And I think we've kind of mentioned from time to time that there's a possibility here that there might be multiple people working together. And this episode, putting both Peter Doppler and Ulrich's dad in the same room, just that's it, isn't it? It's like game, set, and match. These two are in it. Whatever it is, these two are in it together. They know what's going on.
Yeah.
But it gets more interesting than that, because we've then got this situation with this book. They're looking at their watch and going, it's almost 9:17, like specifically waiting for a specific time of the evening. They're waiting for something. And then that's when it all kicks off, isn't it? While Jonas is in the cave, navigating through various doors, we then start seeing the lights flickering in the background in the schools and everywhere.
When Jonas opens the door and he goes in, that's when we start getting all the lights flickering, of disco lights. I noticed when the play was happening, the whole village, all the lights started to go crazy when that door was opened, which makes me think every time that door's opened, that's when we get this activity. I still am holding on for, I think, some of the older characters there now are the younger characters. Like, okay, like, for example, Peter Doppler, that could be, and I know it's not, but that could be Jonas. Or, do you know what I mean? I think that's what this is doing now. I think people who go back know what's going on, this sort of time loop, because they'd be the only people who know this. So that's That's another one of my probably wild theories. Jonas goes in the scary looking door, and I just thought I wouldn't go in there. No way would I go in there. It was like really narrow, and it just wasn't very inviting. I mean, I wouldn't be in the cave, to be fair, or whatever. No, that wasn't in the future. It's like set now. Yeah, so I'd be at home asleep. But yeah, what did you make of? I'm asking the wrong person because you bloody know. But what did you make of every time the lights flashed? Does that mean someone's going back in time or coming back?
Well, it does look like that, doesn't it? Obviously, with the door opening, it seems to coincide. You've got I don't think it's a coincidence that the moment that door opens, you start getting that noise, the flash of lights. It coincides with the time in the book that the Peter Doppler and Jonathan Nielsen are looking at. They seem almost surprised, I guess, that it matches. I don't think they were kind of. I guess it's like Biff Tanner's first realization when the first bet actually works. And he suddenly realizes that he's got something in his hands that's telling the future. And I suspect they were basically in the same situation there. They were looking at a book with a bunch of times and dates, and the first prediction has just come spot on. And they're really confused by that. So I guess that's something that although they're there, maybe they were there kind of not necessarily expecting whatever to pan out the way it did. I think there seems to be a clear connection that the show is making there between those events.
What do you think was the biggest revelation in this episode?
I wouldn't necessarily say the biggest revelation. I did find the fact that Ulrich had finally decided to look at the boy in a bit more detail and come to the conclusion that it was actually his brother. I kind of thought that was obvious, the way the show was going to go. Trying to put myself in his position, being a youngster when it happened, the general fact that time travel is an interesting thing. We, as being third parties, I guess, to a story, kind of accept that time travel, although it's not possible, we suspend disbelief and accept that it is possible in fiction. And that doesn't apply to characters inside the works of fiction generally. When it's given that those people are going to be very incredulous about the idea of time travel, it's not something that's going to be at the forefront of their head. So if Ulrich sees a child, he's not going to automatically assume, oh, that's my brother from the 1980s looking exactly the same as he did back then. Whereas I think we as outsiders looking in are going, well, that's clearly who it is. Who else would it be? So I think the fact that he came to that conclusion at the end of the episode was kind of supposed to be a big, massive revelation. And for me, it really probably wasn't. So I guess we then have to start looking at other aspects of this show to find the moments that we were like, what's this all about? And to be honest, I don't think there are that many. I think the biggest interesting twist in this is simply that Doppler and Nielsen are together in that bunker.
That was an interesting event for sure. But I also thought when those two characters and they have a cat fight, who are the two ladies? What are the names?
So that was Regina Tiedemann, or sorry, the Americanized one would be Regina Tiedemann, which is what you probably heard in your show, whereas for me it'd be Regina Tiedemann. So she was the one who was basically telling the kids, your parents are nasty people, basically. Also told Ulrich when he visited her at the hotel, saying, I could never be as bad as you. Your brother was much nicer. It should have been you that disappeared. That was one of them. And the other one was obviously Katerina Nielsen, who I think had been told some home truths by Regina, but also had, given what she's been discovering about her husband and the affair and so on, she's had a massive rant on air, on radio, on a phone in to tell the entire town that we've got murderers here. No one wants to admit it. Everyone's lying and keeping secrets from each other. I think there's a certain element of her talking specifically about her husband and the affair in there, as well as obviously her child being missing.
Now, did she allude to those kids? Their parents aren't who they think they are.
Yeah, I can see where you were going. It is the sort of thing, isn't it? Where the not necessarily that they're not their real parents, but perhaps, although that would tie in nicely with the earlier episode where they agreed that they weren't going to have kids. But I think my reading of that scene was more that your mum and dad has a secret, something that they did in the past, and they aren't the nice people you seem to think they are. They aren't the respectable school principal and police inspector that you think they are. There's more to it than that. So maybe that doubt seems to seep in because Marta and Magnus at the end are saying, we don't really know who our parents are, do we? We only know them as they are now. We don't know what they were like back then.
There was also a line in it that reminded me of how Back to the Future came about. And the line was, you don't know what your parents were like as kids. And I remember listening to Bob Gale, who wrote Back to the Future, and the whole premise of that film was, he said, he had a revelation once, and it was like, once my parents were my age, I wonder what they were like when they were in school. And that's how the whole premise of Back to the Future came about, because he said, imagine being able to go and meet your parents. So that reminded me of that, like when he said, you don't know what your parents were like as kids. And that was like, that's interesting. Because it sounds like Ulrich was he was a bully. He tied Regina to a tree in a scary forest in the dark. He said, oh, we were kids. It was, well, did he defend himself? Did he say we were kids, we were young?
Yeah, I think he was basically saying, it was a prank or whatever, but it was also, I guess in some ways, presumably this happened after the events with the rape allegation. So it may have been a revenge thing from his point of view, that they wanted to get revenge on her. But clearly that falling out has lasted a lifetime, hasn't it, between them? They could have perhaps been friends, but because of Hannah's meddling, they've always hated each other, really, unfortunately, for no reason at all.
So the biggest revelation was certainly Doppler and Ulrich's father in this hut, and the hut didn't look like a very pleasant place to be. It didn't like a bar or a pub or anything like we get to hang out. It looked like they were there with purpose. The main sort of plot or the main event in this episode for me was Jonas going back to 1986, or not only going back to 1986, but who stops in the car, who stops and like says, do you want to get in? I think it's raining, and it's Hannah, and young Hannah is asking Jonas if he needs a ride or whatever, and he's like, no, and she's like, weirdo type thing. And so you're like, oh my god, now Jonas has gone back in time. My question is, if people go back in time, can they go without waiting 20 years or however many years it is, can they go back to can they go back to 2019 by going in that cave, or do they, once they're back, that's it, they're stuck? Now, before you answer that, Noah, he seems to be able to do it.
Yeah, that's a fair guess there. I mean, we have seen him in those two time periods and not aging between them, so that would imply that is the case, yeah. And also, I guess not forgetting Mads as well, because he was in 1986 and hasn't aged in death. He's shows up in 2019 as a dead body. There's no way that body would be, I suppose perhaps he could have been preserved for 33 years, but perhaps he's also gone back through the same portal.
But this was also interesting because it focused on the gash on his chin.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I must have missed something. I didn't get that, where that relevance came from.
That happened earlier in this episode when Ulrich was talking to his mum after. It was around about the same time that he was questioning his mum about his dad. And the conversation kind of turned to Mads, and his mum was saying about how they were the sort of children who 1 minute they would be hating each other and the next minute, being the best of friends. And there was a particular accident where he hit his chin. There was blood absolutely everywhere, and it looked like a death scene, a murder scene. And then suddenly they're back to being the best of friends again. But unfortunately, he had a gash on his chin. And obviously, while Ulrich is looking through the photo album in the car and looking at all the pictures, he looks at one of these pictures of the chart of his brother, with like arms around each other, sees the mark on his chin, realizes that that's obviously some sort of identifying. But I don't know if he kind of remembered back and went, I think I remember that on this body, or whether he just wanted to go back and have a look just to see whether there was one or not. And obviously he discovers that this body also has this scar on the chin, and I think that's basically settled it for him now. I think he's ready to accept that this child is basically his brother from the 1986.
The camera focused on a necklace on a bedside table, and I'm wondering why is it focusing on that damn necklace? Like, what's the importance of that?
Well, that's a really good question. So that came about earlier in the scene, in one of the scenes where Magnus had gone back, I think, to the forest to. He's clearly still suspicious of what Francesca's doing. You know, the whole thing about where's the money coming from, all of that sort of stuff. He's convinced that there's still drugs involved somewhere. He's gone to explore and try and find out what the deal is there, and comes across a scene that maybe is not likely to paint her in a good light. It suggests that it may not be drug money, but some other form of job that wouldn't be considered to be particularly legal or reputable. So I think that's basically what it's alluding to there, is that this chain we know it belongs to her. And now, you know, the question is, I mean, it's implied that she's basically been prostituting herself. Whether that's the case or not is another matter.
We also find out Regina's husband finds this letter about it's from the doctors about his wife, about a cancer screening, and it's the first he knows about it. And then he finds out, well, the doctor says she needs to make a call as soon as possible. And actually I was surprised at this, because it was the first time we've seen this character actually look like he's got a bit of empathy and humanity to him, and I thought, okay, this guy might have some depth actually.
Yeah, this is it. I mean, in previous episodes, as I think one of the things I'd said about this show and some of the characters is that there are certain characters that are kind of initially presented to be a certain type of character, and you automatically think, oh, you know, this is clearly going to be a bad guy. But as with good shows, they kind of, then they're not just black and white. There's grey to them, and some, it turns out we just completely got the wrong end of the stick, and they turn out to be the nicest person around. And yeah, it's this is the first stage where we see sort of the other side of Alexander Tiedemann, the family man, I guess, the loving husband, as opposed to the corporate boss of a power plant shutting out the police.
Overall, I didn't think it was the best episode, really. I thought it was quite slow to start with. The opening was good, but I thought it was quite a slow episode, this one. It's certainly,
for me, better than 2 and 4 in terms of the episodes, but it's you're right that it is going to accelerate, and I think that's also backed by, if you look at the IMDb ratings for this show, the final 3 episodes, I think, basically are the best 3 episodes of this season, because it really does step up, and there's more answers and more to the mythology of what's going on here, really, the backstory and everything. So, and they will start to unfold over time. And I think from here on, I think we've got 2 key answers from earlier in the episode. The thing about Mads and the thing about Mikkel have now both been answered. We know where they've ended up. There's still a question of why have they gone where they've gone, what's controlling it. You know, there's loads of stuff around that we still need answers to, and I'm sure they will come eventually. There's also going back to the cave network that Jonas explores. Having opened the door and sort of navigated down this narrow tunnel, the tunnel seems to kind of split off in different directions.
Yes.
And so he chooses sort of the path that seems to be to the right. You know, like, what would have happened if he had gone to the left?
I did wonder that. I thought, what is going on with this tunnel? Yeah, it had 2 ways, and how did he know which way to go? I don't think he knew which way to go.
I think it was a complete guess. I don't think he had any kind of, I don't think there was any notes or anything to say you need to now turn this way.
No, absolutely.
As part of your journey. So it was a A or B decision, and he chose B.
Yeah, I'd have chose leave. I'd have chose turn around and get the fuck out of here.
Turn around and go back the other way. Yeah, I think I may have done the same and waited for whoever it is that's writing these things on the map to go turn right, stupid, or something like that, just like to make it really clear about what they're expecting of me once I get to this situation.
I'm wondering who actually even put that door there. Like, someone's got to have put that door there. Like, whatever is going on in this cave, it's clearly has been happening for a long time. And at some point, someone, like, if it is this portal thing, and whoever is control thought, you know what, we best put a door down there, because otherwise people just keep falling in it. Okay, let's put a door down there.
But surely the sign would say something a bit more useful than thus the world was created. That means absolutely sod all, doesn't it? It's not like warning, rip in time here, don't go through here. The question is, what came first? Is it portal, the time, or the door? Did they put the door there to cover up that? Are either events natural? Is the thing I'm kind of asking. Is there just a natural rip in time down there, and then they put the door there, or is it a creation that they then put a door around? Again, it's kind of a bit of a random place to put it, isn't it? In the middle of a cave system that anyone could accidentally explore. I know, we'll just put a door there with a random Latin saying that no one in 2019 even is able to translate unless they're an academic or a doctor.
Yeah, unless there are different ways to time travel, because we did see in the last episode, the stranger, we think it's a stranger, whoever it is, approached the scientist guy and he says, tell me about time travel. And he had a machine. Now, either that machine tells you where the portals are, or that's some sort of time travel device. And maybe there's more ways to time travel than just using the cave. Maybe there's a more convenient way to do it.
The music that accompanied that scene with Regina Tiedemann coming home and crying into her husband's shoulder, that was yet another piece of music that I just fell in love with instantly and needed to go and download it straight away.
It has got a strong soundtrack, this. But I'm scared to go and listen to it on Spotify in case anything reveals itself, so I'm just staying clear. But I do look forward to being able to listen to it properly. And the theme tune, but you can't really call it a theme because there's no melody to it, but the end credits, that's really grown on me now. And it's in fact, it's very similar to, I saw that Tenet yesterday, and that has a wild soundtrack, and it's very similar to the end credits is very similar to some of the music in that film.
It's interesting. I mean, there's a few other things that we're interested in this episode, actually. Like, for example, they made a point on showing the photos of various classes through the years at the school. And maybe a little surprised that nobody ever pointed out that there was a boy in one of the class photos that looked exactly like one of the children at the school at that point. Children are bullies. I can't believe that not one of them went, you look like that little kid from the 80s in this picture. You look like a child trapped in time. That's the sort of thing that I probably would have been involved in back when I was younger. You look like you were dressed in the 80s. So no, I think that's one of the odd, but maybe no one really paid attention to that cabinet.
Possibly. I mean, did you pay attention to what was in your cabinets in school?
Not really, no.
Well, there you go.
So there's the other thing that was interesting to note is while Jonas was exploring the cave, we also have the play that's going on at the same time in the school that Marta is performing a monologue at. And it's quite interesting. There was two parts of this that I kind of picked up on. I don't know how much of it is a coincidence or whether it has more meaning to it. But the first thing is the character that had the black mask, I guess, across his face, across the eyes, kind of looks a little bit similar to how the boy that had been discovered in the earlier episodes with the sort of burnt out eyes across his the black marks across his eyes and face. Whether there was any reasoning for those similarities as presented by the show, or whether that just happened to be I don't know. I always second guess everything in this show, whether there's a reason for it being the way it is. And certainly that's true of the monologue that Marta gives as the character of Ariadne, which the character of Ariadne, I think, has been mentioned more than once in this season already. Particularly what makes it quite striking in this particular episode is that the reason that Ariadne is sort of known, the story of Ariadne, is that she gave Theseus a thread that allowed him to find his way through the labyrinth and then exit the labyrinth. So while that's happening while this monologue is happening, we have Jonas navigating through this cave system following a red string. And that does beg the question. Certainly there seems to be a deliberate theme going on here with threads, Ariadne's threads, and that will allow him to find his way through and find his way back, I'm guessing. So that's something. But also the wording, the monologue itself, that sort of had a few interesting points. So I think towards the end of it, she says something like, "Is he not your brother? It's all the same to me." And just the way things are going at the moment, given that it was her brother that disappeared, I think the whole monologue needs, further investigation, really, because I think there could be some stuff in there that may or may not have some relevance later on. I think that's the sort of stuff where if you watch the entire season, all 3 seasons, and then come back to that monologue, I bet there'll be some themes in there that you go, oh, that kind of relates to this thing over here that happened much later, some foreshadowing going on there.
How important is this episode in the grand scale of things?
None at all.
Great. Okay, there we go.
I think there's certainly the fact that Jonas is now in 1986 must be significant. That I guess that's the biggest thing that we take out of this episode now, is that there's that, and then obviously the 2 men that seem to be involved that are waiting in the bunker. That's obviously another big significant point. But I think everything else in this episode has been largely going out, reiterating things that we kind of already knew. We know that Hannah and Ulrika have been having an affair, and that Hannah seems to be a bit possessive of him and wants him for herself. So I think we were covering a lot of old ground there, but certainly the 2 new developments are that Doppler and Nielsen are involved in some way together, and we presume at least that it might, we assumed at least that it was related to the kids disappearing, but now we seem to have something related to time. So there's that, and then there's the big finish, really, I guess, that Jonas is in 1986. What damage is he going to cause? That's the question.
That is the question. And the more I think about it, the more I think Jonas, I think he's already in I think he's already in present time, a lot older. I think we've seen him already. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's a major character. It's like a gotcha moment. Like, oh, there he is. They've already done that, so it would be maybe too predictable for them to go down that route. I think we're going to see a lot of these characters and we go, oh, that's the same person.
Or...
because I think I might be getting close to the truth.
Or... maybe not.
Put it this way, if this show was just that, I'd be like, okay, well, it's a clever idea, but you can't stretch that out of 3 seasons. So I think there's a lot more that's going on. I think that's sort of there's the tip of the iceberg. So what's next week's episode? What do I have to look forward to?
Next week's episode is actually a pretty good one. There's a lot going back to, you're going to have to find out, but I think you're going to enjoy next week's episode. And I think it's going to be the episode that perhaps has you really immediately wanting to hit next and move straight to the next episode as soon as it finishes.
But what's the next episode called? And I will predict what happens based on the title.
The next episode is called Crossroads.
Crossroads. Okay. In Crossroads, what I think will happen is... Once again, thanks for listening to this week's episode of Cinebinge. My name's Simon.
And I've been Andrew.
And make sure you go and leave us a review on iTunes, on Apple. It really does help the show, and we appreciate all the little messages that you've been sending us and the tweets and whatnot. You can follow us at cinebinge TV. You can follow us on Instagram, cinebinge, and the website is cinebinge.tv. But until next time, we shall see you soon. Boom, done.